Hello everyone, welcome back to Wonderland Wednesday. Today we're going to be talking about the 1915 version of Alice in Wonderland, another silent film, and probably not one of our favorites that we've seen so far.
The least favorite of the silent films. You would think that they would get better, but my favorite is the 1903.
They took a lot of creative liberties, I guess you would say, with the story, especially at the beginning.
In a bad way.
They made it very strange. It started out with them at home with their mother, and her sister came and took her on a walk. And then they were seeing on the walk all these different things that sort of alluded to things she'd be seeing later, with the implication that she was
They were
they were going to influence her dreams.
They were explaining away the dream before it had even happened, with them picking flowers, seeing Dinah in the tree. Another thing that would be good to mention is that we don't have all of this version. It was originally around 2 hours long. It included both Alice in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass, so you don't even see all of that fleshed out. There were no flower people, once again. Thanks.
There's actually more than one version of this movie floating around, because it started out as 2 hours and then it was cut down and different studios made different cuts of it. We picked out one that was going to have music, and it ended up being really weird. The music was sort of
Poorly
eerie.
paired.
And the other one that we started watching after that, there was no music, but there were a few more scenes that made things make slightly more sense. I'll put a link in the description below for the one that we ended up watching, because if you're going to watch one, at least watch the one that makes slightly more sense.
Definitely. When the story gets to the point where you would expect it to, it's very creepy. I personally was quite disturbed, and he was amused at how disturbed I was. The rabbit comes along, and instead of being this cute little bunny that's in a hurry to get back to where he needs to go see the queen or whoever, he's just sort of slowly beckoning her into dreamland.
It's very surreal. If you're a fan of surrealism, I think you'll like this movie, but
Apparently I'm not. I don't know.
yeah, it was really strange.
It looks like her spirit is rising up out of her body. I don't know how they did this effect. I'm not techie that way, but it looked creepy.
If she was like having an out-of-body experience on her way to Wonderland, which didn't
so
make a whole lot
wrong.
of sense. When Alice eventually falls down the rabbit hole, it feels even less technologically advanced than the previous version. It's sort of like the camera is staying on her, and then the background, you could maybe see some things slowly moving past her. And then there was like a bat flitting around, and they said she was falling down an old well, which really didn't make any sense because it's supposed to be a rabbit hole. So in the hall with the doors, there really is no shrinking and growing, but she cries a river of tears anyway.
You have this one point where the water rat is there, and it basically looks like the top of him being dragged by under the screen. He doesn't really look like he's swimming. There isn't a lot of life to it. And then when she is swimming, you have a person in a rat costume making their way.
When they finally get out of the river of tears, it's another scene that I think they may have just made up for this movie. They're like building a fire to try and dry off, which
I far more appreciate the Disney version where she's there and they're already having the caucus race. It's very perky, stuff's happening. But instead you have this scene where they're on the bank trying to get dried off, and then all of these creatures are supposed to be gathering together, and they keep having these snapshots of these creatures and their thoughts as they're going to the caucus race.
it's a very bizarre choice.
We liked the dodo costume.
Yeah, that was one of the best costumes in the film. The dodo actually looked rather good.
It did.
Unlike the lion or
Bill.
Bill.
Bill looked like he was crippled or something. It was basically some guy dragging himself slowly across the rocks.
He looked like a Komodo dragon with broken back legs, sort of
The
dragging
effect-
himself painfully.
The effect was wrong. And there were creatures there that didn't look like they belonged.
No, the griffin and the mock turtle were there for some reason.
Why on
I think
earth?
maybe the caterpillar had been there. It was like they had all these costumes. They thought, well, let's get our money out of them. Let's use them in this scene too.
It was the Wonderland after party. I don't know.
But it was really strange.
And then they had her talking about her cat in this scene where it didn't belong. It was supposed to happen earlier, and then you have these creatures wandering off like they're not.
They were supposed to be offended, but they sort of just wandered off like they lost interest.
It didn't look right.
After that, she ends up going to the rabbit's house.
The furniture in the house was quite cute, and they did a good enough job on the outside of the house that we were halfway wondering whether it was a prop house or for real, but it was probably prop. And then they have her leaving while he still thinks that she's Marianne. There is no giant person in the house with Bill trying to go down the chimney. They've skipped all that.
She ends up at the caterpillar next.
He looked pretty good until he got down on the ground and was doing this weird crawl.
It was sort of the same crawl that Bill the Lizard was doing. It looked a little better with him as the caterpillar, but since we'd seen his face on his underside, it was like he was dragging himself along with his face.
They also did something really different in this version in that they acted out the "You Are Old, Father William" poem.
On screen in lyric form with no music and them just sort of pantomiming out the things that were happening in the poem.
But it was kind of odd, and I just didn't care for it as much. I'm not saying that it was terrible, but I personally didn't care for it as much.
It would have been better with music. I kind of feel like going back and taking that scene and adding the "They Might Be Giants" version on top of it, I think that would work really well. So after she's finally finished with the caterpillar and he's crawled off, she ends up going to the Duchess's house. They had a little title card where it talks about her eating the mushroom pieces and shrinking and growing, but again, it didn't show it. You're just supposed to know that now she's back to human size and she's going to go visit some humans now.
This house was bigger than the 1910 version, wasn't it?
Yeah, and so were the heads. The heads were huge and ugly.
And the little boy, who sadly got to be the son, looked like he was maybe 2. He didn't look happy, and I think the Duchess may have been trying to be gentle with him, because the part about hitting your little boy, she basically turned him over and gently patted him. I think she figured he was going through enough that day. The Cheshire Cat was at the house.
It was one of the worst Cheshire Cats that I've seen so far.
And he was up in the tree talking to her.
But it was really creepy, especially when he did the whole fading in and out thing. They put the costume in the tree, and took away the body, and then sort of faded the scenes together. But basically then you're left with the head sitting on the tree branch looking like it had been decapitated.
Yeah, they basically just left the head behind, and it looked very wrong.
There was no life left in the head, it just looked like
it was just
died.
sitting there.
After the horrible cat costume, we move on to more horrible costumes because she goes to the Mad Tea Party.
And it gets worse.
And this is probably one of the worst Mad Hatters. It's another giant head. I would say it's worse than the Duchess. It's just
definitely,
ugly.
definitely. He was amused because I was disturbed by his nostrils. His nostrils are so hideous, and he has this scraggly hair and this ugly mouth. And wasn't the hair costume, that also was not your favorite in this one?
The hair was ugly too. He was ugly, but he was overshadowed in ugliness by the Mad Hatter.
And the Dormouse, probably neither here nor there, just there.
It was kind of amusing though, because at the end when they stuffed him in the teapot, there was just suddenly a giant teapot in the middle of the table that they were cramming him into.
It wasn't there before, we don't know where it came from.
After the tea party, they go to the Queen's courtyard, which this was probably one of the highlights of the film because Sarah loved the garden. They did have a nice location for this. It was
beautiful. They obviously went to a place that was already established. They did have the scene with painting the roses, and they included a good amount of dialogue, so it's easier to keep engaged with the scene.
This is probably the first one where they actually eventually go to play croquet, because they didn't do that in the other two versions, the other two silent versions.
One of Jonathan's favorite parts, the executioner shows up, the Queen wants everybody to be beheaded. And this may be the only time, which is so wrong, but this may be the only time that you see the rabbit hurrying because you have this giant axe flailing after it.
When she says everyone is to be executed, the executioner apparently has targeted the white rabbit as being the first victim. So he's chasing the white rabbit around, which was kind of hilarious.
That part was cute. I approve.
Okay, we're back. More technical difficulties. My battery died and I had to switch to a different camera. It's like the universe just does not want us to review this version of the movie.
The universe doesn't like it either.
So after the white rabbit has been chased around enough, for some reason the queen decides that she wants to take Alice to go visit the griffin.
We did not like the griffin. He looked like a demon bird with creepy little hands.
They were like longer than human arms were supposed to be, but instead of like putting something inside so they would be stiff, they just sort of flopped around and they had a claw at the end and it just looked wrong.
He didn't like that you could see the rabbit's people hands. This took the cake way over that. The mock turtle, I should say, his costume wasn't too bad. He had the little rubbery flippers, but it didn't look as weird on him. This scene, we didn't mind too much.
It was one of the better scenes of the movie.
It was like they combined something that they shouldn't have, but it kind of worked. First off, you have these people in lobster costumes coming out of the sea, and that looked creepy and wrong. It's like, okay, here come the demon lobsters. Once they got onto the beach and stood up and started walking, they had striped trousers, and that looked cool. I liked that. And instead of porpoises,
they had walruses instead of porpoises, which they were cute. They were carrying little parasols. They had like little suits on.
they were our favorite costumes, I think, out of the whole film. Unfortunately, they took forever getting them onto the beach, and when it came to the dance part, it was just like they moved around a little bit and then it was over and then you were on to the next thing.
Yeah,
So-
then the rabbit came by and told them that they had to come to the trial, which was random. I don't think that was how it was in the book either.
It was also kind of like the beginning in that it took them forever. They're wandering along, and finally when they do get to the trial, one of the things that I did appreciate about it was that they gave place a little bit more to the cook, and they threw that line in there, you know, what are tarts made of? And she's like, pepper mostly, and I think did she leave in a cloud of pepper?
I think so. She was shaking it and there was pepper.
So that
dust
part was
around.
fun.
The trial was one of the better scenes of the film because it was abbreviated like most everything else, but they had enough lines and enough scenes happening within the trial that it felt a lot more true to the spirit of the book than the rest of the movie.
They didn't have any of the cuteness with Bill, but
Instead they had a mouse falling asleep or going into a coma on the courtroom floor.
you
I don't
didn't
know.
care
He
for
looked-
that part.
He looked kind of like he was dying on the floor. Like the rest of the movie, there was not any growing or shrinking happening here.
And at some
Yes.
point, there was a shower of cards. She was back on the bank, and they wandered off. It was rather abrupt, but I think maybe it would have made a little more sense if we had had more of the through the looking glass part,
Yes,
because they were
probably.
probably transitioning right into that. We really don't have the full story, and maybe there are things that we would have liked that we just don't have the footage of.
So I guess that's probably it for today's Wonderland Wednesday. Next week we'll be talking about the 1949 French version of Alice in Wonderland. So I'll see you next time.
Bye.